Welcome into another season prediction episode. Today we're talking about the Texas Longhorns. The Longhorns went 5-7 a year ago. Can they get back to a bowl game? We'll see. We'll see what I'm thinking for today. They went 3-6 in the Big 12 last year. So it was really a tale of two stories. They started off really strong, but at the end of the year, they were unable to close out games. Their offense kind of went through ebbs and flows, and their defense was just consistently bad all year. And it really impacted them, especially late in the season when their offense kind of took a step back. They were just unable to get stops, and it really all culminated with that loss to Kansas because they simply could not get a stop against a really bad Kansas team. So let's see how they're going to do this year. Let's start on the offensive side. I think the one name that everyone's going to talk about, and it's probably the most important name on this roster, is Quinn Ewers. And for good reason, right? Because he hasn't won the battle with Hudson Card yet, but I think most people would say he already has won that job. I know I would. I think he's going to be their starting quarterback, and he hasn't played in a while. You know, he went to Ohio State enrolling early. He did not play his senior year at South Lake Carroll. Went to Ohio State instead, did not play there, then transferred to Texas. And so now he's being asked to come into a situation where the expectations are really high and pretty much all the pressure is on him. Because I think from where I sit, this offense has to be great if Texas is going to be just good next year. So a lot of pressure on him, but he has a lot of playmakers to work with. Bijan Robinson, a potential Heisman candidate, one of the best running backs in the country, potential first round, maybe second round pick in the NFL draft next year. He's a difference maker. And he can do it in a variety of ways. He catches the ball really well out of the backfield. He's a very physical runner, very strong, moves the pile. If they're able to block for him, he's going to be really, really good and really tough to stop. At wide receiver, Xavier Worthy is the headliner, but a couple other guys. Isaiah Nayor, he transferred there from Wyoming. Really good playmaker, a guy that's going to be open a lot, runs really crisp routes, and I know Texas fans are really excited about him, which is big as well. I'm really high on a guy who I don't think people mention enough from last year's team, and that's Jordan Whittington. And I think, you know, a couple things coincide in their downfall last year. Casey Thompson getting injured was probably the biggest part of it. But when Jordan Whittington went down, they just really had trouble getting first downs. And he's such a safety blanket for any quarterback in this offense. So I think he was kind of an unsung hero from last year's team and a guy that they really need to get back to top form this year. At tight end, Jatavian Sanders, highly, highly rated recruit out of Denton Ryan. Really like his game. I think he could be a difference maker. Alabama transfer Jaleel Billingsley will also fit in as well. But overall, the biggest question mark, I think, also on offense is kind of the offensive line. And the reason I say that is because if they can't protect Quinn Ewers, then he's going to have problems. If they can't run block well enough, then Bijan Robinson is going to have problems. And overall, this offense is going to fail. I like the unit, but I think they're still really young. And I think their most talented players up front are freshmen. And that's a problem, right? Because they're going to want to get the freshmen some playing time, but then it's a matter of if they're ready or not. And they have some older guys. I just don't know if the older guys are really all that good. And so it kind of makes this a very complex situation in my eyes because if they start the older guys, I think it gives them a safe floor, but I don't know how high the ceiling is. Whereas if you start freshmen, the floor drops out completely, and then you're just hoping on all of them hitting as true freshmen, that's a tough ask for the offensive line. So a couple numbers offensively. Against good defenses, so I classify that as top 40 defenses that were on their schedule last year. Baylor, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Arkansas. They averaged 19 points per game in those 4 games, and they only ran for 120 yards. And that was a huge difference in kind of their approach from the entire season. So 19 points per game, 120 yards. Their other 8 games, they averaged 43.3 points per game and ran for well over 200 yards per game. That's the difference right there. They have got to be more consistent, and their offense has to translate against the good defenses that they're going to face in the Big 12. And there's quite a few good defenses in the Big 12 this year. So they're going to have to figure out that part. But I will say, I think the rushing attack is the area that I'm looking at the most because that drop off of about 100 yards between the bad teams and the good teams defensively was massive, and it drastically impacted their passing game and everything they were trying to do, protecting the quarterback and just moving the ball in general. Moving on to the defensive side. They were terrible last year. Their run defense got hammered. 201 yards per game is what they allowed, which was 114th in the country. They gave up 31 points per game, which was 99th in the country. And they only finished with 20 sacks on the year, which was 98th in the country. So it's this reoccurring theme of just not being very good at really anything. And all of those things really tell me they weren't physical enough up front. They weren't able to get after the quarterback. They weren't able to stop the run. And when you can't do those things, it's usually a sign that you're getting beaten up a little bit on the interior of your offensive line and defensive line and so on and so forth. So I like some of the guys they have, though, right? So Keandre Coburn, Alfred Collins, I think they're really good players. The consistency just wasn't there. And I think it was more so the cultural buy-in. And I think Steve Sarkisian's trying to fix that, and I think he will, and they're going to trend in a different direction. But I felt like this team just kind of gave up at moments and looked really soft at moments. The games that I kind of look at, Arkansas in particular, they got ran over. Baylor in the second half, they could not stop the run. Even Oklahoma, to an extent, their run game really saved them in that one. So they really have to adjust and get better in that regard. I love DeMarvion Overshown, their linebacker. I think he's an all Big 12 guy. He's all over the field, and it took him a while to really reach this point where you kind of sat there and went, okay, we know he's a physical freak, but is he actually a good football player? And I think he's finally turned that corner a little bit. In the secondary, Ryan Watts, they brought him in from Ohio State. He's about 6'4", 200 pounds. Finally gives them some length on the outside, defending these big wide receivers in the Big 12. So I really like what he's bringing to the table. Deshaun Jameson on the other side. So pretty set at cornerback. And then at safety, Jaron Thompson, Anthony Cook, I think they're solid enough. I wouldn't call it an elite group, but I think they're pretty good on the back end. So let's take a look at the schedule. The wins. UL Monroe, UTSA, which will be a little sneaky, at Texas Tech, at Kansas, and TCU. That's 5 wins. I feel pretty good about giving them those 5 wins. I think they'll take care of business in those matchups. The losses I have, I don't think they're winning at Oklahoma State or at Kansas State. I just don't see them being able to go on to those road environments and getting those wins. So I right now would project those as losses. And they could be close calls as well. They'll be good games, but I'm leaning towards the loss there. Close call games. Oklahoma, Baylor, West Virginia, Iowa State. The West Virginia and Iowa State games are on there because it's kind of sandwiching the Oklahoma game, which makes me a little skeptical on how ready they're going to be for one of those games. So I think they'll lose one of them, win the other one. And so now you're seeing there with 6 wins. And you got to find a way to win 3 more in order to cover the over-under of 8.5. I don't see it happening. I don't think they're going to be able to get to 9 wins this year. I'm leaning towards 7-5 or 8-4. I just think those matchups, I think Oklahoma's going to beat them. I think last game of the year against Baylor, when they could be sitting there at, maybe they're 7-4 or 8-3 that last game, and then you're facing a Baylor team that might be playing for the Big 12 championship. They honestly both could be fighting to try to make a Big 12 championship game. I'm just very skeptical. And then obviously starting the season when you're going to have a loss, or at least I know they're going to have a loss in that Alabama matchup, just makes it really hard for me to get to an over-under win total of more than 8.5. So I'm going 8-4 this year for Texas. I think that's still a successful year. If that means 6-3 or 5-4 in conference play, that is building, right? That's getting better. They were 3-6 a year ago in conference. That's a big step in the right direction for the Longhorns in 2022. That's it for Texas. We will have more season predictions throughout the week, but thanks for listening.